The sky was a molten scar above the mud, burning red and orange through the perpetual haze of smoke and chemical fog. Shells tore through the air with thunderous roars, exploding into columns of fire that sprayed molten earth in every direction. I dragged my friend across the radioactive mud, the weight of his body a dead anchor against my shoulder. His skin was half melted, teeth scattered across his bloodied mask, and each cough racked his lungs with blackened bile. "Abroag Armain Rukun, Mudge Zindamat Rekna," he whispered, barely audible over the din of war. Even the air itself was an enemy. Sulfur stung our lungs, chemical clouds gnawed at our skin, and the bitter metallic tang of decay coated everything. Around us, soldiers, or what remained of them, lay like broken toys, bodies stacked like barricades, limbs twisted into grotesque shapes, and the ever-present mud swallowing screams and blood alike. I pressed the respirator tighter, feeling its filters fail halfway through the inhalation. Sparks of static flickered across my visor. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the slaughter, a whisper beneath the roar burrowed into my mind. Not the static, not the orders from overseers, not the screams. It was something else, something alive. A truth I couldn't yet name. We are already dead, and yet here we crawl. This is Savlar, a place where even survival feels like a crime, where hope is poisonous, and each breath is borrowed against an unforgiving emperor who doesn't notice us, where life, such as it is measured in seconds and chemical burns. Where you fight not for glory, not for honor, but simply to exist another moment. I froze for a heartbeat, taking in the scene. A half-burnt comrade flailed in the mud, grabbing at nothing, screaming silently. I remembered what they called us, Chem-Dogs. Walking corpses, fueled by painkillers and stimulants, thrown into the meat grinder as if we were nothing. And yet, in this inferno of broken men and ruined machines, I realized something strange. A spark buried deep within, beneath the masks, beneath the chemical filth, beneath the endless chain of orders and punishment, something that whispered, "You are more than they think, more than they can control." And for a second, just one fleeting second, I believed it. Savlar was never meant for the living. Its toxic plains, scorched factories, and acid rain-washed ruins were a cradle for death disguised as survival. The Imperium didn't send its finest soldiers here. They sent the unwanted, the broken, the condemned. Criminals, deserters, addicts, thieves, all stripped of their past and pressed into uniforms that smelled of iron and decay. The legend of the Chem-Dogs was born from punishment. Ordinary regiments of the Astra Militarum carried out orders with discipline, with pride, with hope. The Chem-Dogs? They carried only a curse. Every recruit knew from the moment their toes crossed the threshold of the training pits that this wasn't an army. It was a sentence. Factories leaked poison into rivers that once carried water. Airborne chemicals choked lungs before recruits even reached adolescence. And for those unlucky enough to survive childhood in Savlar, the Imperium offered them a choice: enlist or die. The choice was meaningless. Training didn't teach skill. It taught endurance. It taught obedience under pain beyond comprehension. Officers became torturers. Camps became laboratories for breaking both body and mind. And the Chem-Dogs, they emerged hollowed, addicted to chem stims. Their nerves deadened, their hearts hardened, their humanity traded for survival. Yet in every whispered tale, in every shadow of the ruins, one truth remained. These walking corpses carried a strange sort of pride, not because they had been chosen, but because they had survived the curse. Every step across the shattered earth, every scream swallowed by mud, every death witnessed, they bore it all and continued. This is the story of their hell, their bond, their suffering, and their rare, fleeting moments of defiance. This is the story of the Savlar Chem-Dogs, not heroes, not soldiers, not even men in the eyes of the Imperium, but survivors of a world designed to destroy them. The first breath you take in Savlar is never clean. Sulfur clouds curl into your lungs like venom, and the air tastes of ash, iron, and decay. The horizon is a jagged line of scorched factories, each one belching acid rain that hisses as it hits the poisoned soil. Rivers run black with sludge, and the children who crawl through this wasteland cough up black mucus before they even learn to speak. Here, survival is not a choice. It is an accident. Every footstep on the barren ground is a gamble. The soil itself is a chemical trap, contaminated for decades by the Imperium's insatiable war machine. Food grows twisted, bloated with toxins, and yet the people eat it because hunger is a more immediate killer than poison. Even the wind carries disease. Even hope carries death. In this world, the Chem-Dogs are born broken, long before they enter the training pits. Their bones are brittle from malnutrition, their lungs scorched from the perpetual fumes, their minds frayed from years of exposure to violence and neglect. They are raised in the shadows of factories that pump poison into the sky, in alleys where gangs and scavengers rule over survival of the cruelest. Every child learns early that trust is lethal, and mercy is a luxury that does not exist. Factories hiss and grind in the distance, spewing acid that eats the metal frames of ruined machinery. The air vibrates with low-frequency tremors, the groans of a land too sick to support life. And yet, for the first time, I understood what it meant when someone whispered, "In Savlar, hope is poisonous too." Children, barely older than 10, are already familiar with death. Rats gnaw on what remains of scavenged corpses, and scavenger gangs train the young to steal, fight, and kill, or die trying. They know the taste of bile, the sting of burning acid, the pressure of a body trembling under starvation. And these children, when they grow into recruits, carry every scar, every infection, every betrayal into the military's training program. By the time a boy becomes a Chem-Dog, he is already a walking corpse, mental faculties dulled, body ravaged, spirit sharpened only by the knowledge that death is inevitable. And yet beneath the filth, beneath the scars, beneath the chemical burns, there is a spark, a flicker of defiance that survives despite everything. This is the crucible of Savlar. The Chem-Dogs are forged not by honor, but by the relentless cruelty of the land. They are born into war, into suffering, and into a fate that does not forgive weakness. And from the moment their toes touch the mud of their home, they understand the only rule of this place: survive or vanish into the poison forever. In Savlar, survival is not enough. To serve the Imperium here, you must first prove you are expendable. The factories of despair send their own to the gates of the military. Criminals, deserters, addicts, smugglers, anyone society has already written off, and the Imperium smiles at this. They call it the training program, but it is nothing more than a factory of broken men. The journey begins in the camps. Guards march with boots caked in mud and blood, dragging the newest arrivals from cell to cell. The air smells of sweat, rot, and chemicals. A harsh voice barks orders, each one a reminder that resistance is pointless. Inmates are stripped of their names, their identities replaced with numbers branded onto their flesh or tattooed across forearms. Identity is a luxury here. Obedience is currency. Inside the training halls, misery becomes routine. The stench of scorched flesh and chemicals fills the rooms where prisoners are forced to crawl through vats of industrial sludge. And stems are injected into veins with mechanical precision. Chemicals designed to erase fatigue, to mute fear, to dissolve pain. The body reacts violently. Veins burst, nerves scream, organs threaten rebellion. But consciousness remains tethered to the order of survival. Officers, glorified executioners, patrol the barracks and training yards. Their boots thunder across the floor, striking any who falter. A man's hand twitching toward his own thigh for relief, a whisper of despair, is punished with a crack across the skull. The screams echo endlessly, ricocheting off steel walls, embedding themselves into the psyche of every recruit. Some scream until their throats bleed. Some simply go silent, hollowed from the inside out. The transformation is cinematic in its horror. A boy, trembling and soaked in chemical sludge, is forced to march across a minefield of corpses while firing a rifle he barely knows how to load. Explosions erupt around him and the officer shouts, "Run or die!" He runs. He survives, but only barely. By the time he reaches the other side, his hands shake uncontrollably, his lungs burn, and his teeth are stained black from the chemicals in the air. And yet, he is still not a soldier. Not yet. This is the crucible of the Chem-Dogs. Torture is disguised as discipline. Addiction is passed off as enhancement, and broken bodies are declared ready for combat. Each man emerges as a hollowed version of himself, mind and body fused with pain, fear, and chemical resilience. They fight not because they are brave, but because they are too poisoned to feel the pain of death. The final step in the pipeline is obedience, blind, total, and unquestioning. Each Chem-Dog learns quickly that disobedience is a death sentence, but that compliance offers only temporary reprieve. They are disposable. They are weapons. They are shadows of men who were once alive. By the end of the process, the Imperium does not have soldiers. It has walking corpses, hardened, numb, and unbreakable. They do not carry hopes. They carry orders. They do not carry dreams. They carry stim-addled rage. And when they step onto the battlefield for the first time, The only thing they will know for certain is this: the world has already discarded them, but the Emperor still expects them to live. The first injection feels like fire coursing through the veins. Warm, sharp, a rush of awareness, clarity, and power. But it is a lie. Chem stims are not gifts, they are chains. They bind the body to the battlefield, erase pain, and twist survival into a grotesque dance with death. Every nerve screams, every organ protests, yet the soldier moves forward, always forward. Muscles tear, bones splinter, skin burns from chemical corrosion, eyes twitch with unholy focus. But the Chem-Dog barely notices. The stims have dulled the senses, muted the instinct to protect oneself. The brain rewires itself. Pain is irrelevant. Death is irrelevant. Humanity is irrelevant. Nightmares begin long before sleep comes. The mind fractures in quiet moments. Visions of blackened skies, twisted faces of fallen comrades, rivers of chemical sludge flowing through familiar streets. Some hear whispers, faint at first, then screaming in perfect sync with a rapid heartbeat induced by stims. Insomnia consumes the hours between deployments, leaving the Chem-Dog to pace endlessly through mud and ruin. Organ failure is inevitable. Liver, kidneys, heart, they falter silently at first, masked by stimulant-induced energy surges. Fingers go numb, muscles stiffen, skin peels from chemical burn. Yet the Chem-Dog fights on, oblivious because consciousness is tethered to stimulation, and the body's pleas are drowned out by artificially heightened adrenaline. Paranoia blooms like a fungus. Trust is impossible. Even brothers in arms are potential threats. Eyes dart at shadows, weapons clutched tighter than ever, as hallucinations mingle with reality. Shadows move in ways that do not make sense. Faces twist into grotesque masks of past victims. The Chem-Dog begins to see the battlefield as a living entity. Hungry, breathing, aware of each broken body. Pain becomes an absence. Fear becomes a memory. And through it all, the stims push the body beyond natural limits. A Chem-Dog might fight with an arm broken in 3 places, ribs pierced by shrapnel, veins bleeding. Every movement is agony, yet the mind cannot register it fully. The stims allow him to crawl over corpses, drag the dying, and face artillery without flinching. But survival comes at a price. Addiction is inevitable. The body cries for the next injection. Withdrawal is more torturous than the battlefield itself. Nausea, hallucinations, uncontrollable shakes, fevered delirium. Those who cannot endure the chemical agony are left behind, discarded as useless. Another casualty of a system that demands obedience above all. By the time a Chem-Dog steps onto the battlefield, he is no longer human. He is a weapon, a vessel for chemical-fueled rage and endurance, an instrument of destruction. Pain no longer defines him. Fear no longer controls him. Only instinct, only programming, only the whispers of survival remain. The stims do not make them heroes. They make them unstoppable. They make them unfeeling. They make them disposable. The transport drops with a shudder, throwing Chem-Dogs against steel walls coated in years of grime and blood. The vehicle's interior reeks of metal, sweat, and chemical residue. No one speaks. Breathing is shallow. The stims pulse in their veins, sharp and unyielding. Eyes dart at one another, half fear, half anticipation. The doors screech open. Outside, the world is a living nightmare. Trenches gape like the jaws of the dead, filled with mud, corpses, and rotting debris. Smoke curls from distant explosions, carrying the acrid scent of burning flesh and acid. Overhead, artillery hammers the sky into pieces. Streaks of molten metal scream past like angry comets. Orders scream through the comms. Advance. Cross no man's land. Do not stop. Do not fall. No warnings about the carnage awaiting them, because the Imperium does not care. Chem-Dogs are disposable. Every step forward is a gamble against death, yet stepping back is unthinkable. The first few yards are a baptism. A shell detonates nearby, throwing mud and shattered bone into the air. One Chem-Dog falls, screaming, only to have another trample over him without a pause. Bullets shred the ground. Sniper rounds clip helmets and shoulders, spraying brains into the muck. The stims block the instinct to flinch, block the horror. But the mind records everything. The eyes see, the ears hear, and the soul screams anyway. Bodies lie in grotesque piles, used as barricades, as shields. Blood mingles with mud, forming a dark, steaming soup that the soldiers wade through. Each step is measured against the knowledge that death can strike at any moment. Yet the Chem-Dogs push forward. Muscles scream. Ribs threaten to crack. Limbs tremble. But the chemical lifeline demands compliance, forcing legs to move faster, arms to carry weapons heavier than their own weight. A companion falls beside one Chem-Dog, face half melted by acid, lungs bleeding. The survivor barely notices, pressing forward. Overhead, artillery fire shatters reality itself. Each impact a small apocalypse. Smoke, fire, and chemical fog reduce the battlefield to a hellscape of indistinct horrors. The wind carries screams and the scent of roasted flesh. In that moment, the soldiers realize there is no salvation. Only forward, only endurance, only the imperative to obey. The concept of safety is a cruel joke. Hope is a poison. Pain is a constant companion. Death is inevitable, yet they are trained to treat it as a casual inconvenience. Amid the chaos, fleeting moments of camaraderie appear. An arm pulled from the mud, a whispered warning of sniper fire, but they are swallowed quickly by the relentless grind. No one stops. No one cares. The battlefield is indifferent. And the Chem-Dogs, they are nothing but instruments of suffering, moving through fire and rot with single-minded purpose, survive long enough to obey the next command. The first deployment is not a trial. It is a sentence measured in blood, smoke, and shattered bone. And by the end, the Chem-Dogs understand a fundamental truth. The Emperor does not protect them. The Imperium does not protect them. Only the stems, the will to move, and the twisted bonds with their fellow damned allow them to persist. In the hellscape of Savlar, where the air tastes of iron and rot, survival isn't just a personal endeavor. It is a shared brutal covenant. The Chem-Dogs discover quickly that there is no honor, no glory, no medals waiting at the end of the mud-choked trenches. Only each other. Only the unspoken promise that when the bombs fall and the bodies rise, someone will be there to pull you from the filth. It begins with small gestures, a hand pulling a fallen friend from a pool of chemical sludge, a shared ration of rancid protein paste, a whispered warning about a sniper perched in the shattered husk of a once loyal tank. At first, these acts feel transactional, necessary for survival. But slowly, they weave into something resembling family, something resembling loyalty. In the trenches, trust is currency. The Chem-Dogs barter with each other in silent, grim ways. Who shares their chem? Stem when one shakes too violently from withdrawal? Who takes point through a minefield? Whose blood-soaked back shields another from a flailing bayonet? The officers call them disposable. The Imperium sees them as nothing more than walking corpses, but inside the mud and smoke they are human again, if only fleetingly. One Chem-Dog kneels beside a comrade, carving crude symbols into the mud to mark the graves of fallen friends. Another shares a flask of acid-proof water, swapping empty words for reassurance. They whisper names into the wind, murmuring prayers for survival, for vengeance, for release. In these moments, the battlefield softens not with safety but with connection. The brotherhood is not uniform. Some cling to humor, a razor-thin line between sanity and despair. Others bear silent rage, fists clenched at the emptiness around them. And yet they move as one, an unholy unit forged in agony, trauma, and relentless purpose. They steal what they need to survive, shield each other from sadistic officers, and carry the dying with hands trembling, lungs burning. There are moments when the madness becomes almost palpable. A Chem-Dog hallucinates his fallen friend, calling him forward through the chemical fog. Another hears the screams of the dead, guiding him through no man's land like a spectral map. And yet the brotherhood does not falter. It adapts. It survives. The grime on their faces is a badge. The burns and scars are medals no one can award. The only rule, a survivor mutters to a trembling recruit. A Chem-Dog apniko nahi shorta. One does not abandon the pack. One does not falter. One does not yield to despair, no matter how thin the line between life and death may be. It is in this unholy kinship, this fragile yet unbreakable connection, that the Chem-Dogs discover their true strength, not in obedience, not in the stems, not even in their weapons, but in each other. And when the next shell lands, when the next sniper finds a mark, when the mud and blood rise higher, they face it together, because in the damned, the fallen, the broken, they have something no officer, no artillery, no chemical nightmare can ever destroy: the brotherhood. The trenches of Savlar are living nightmares. They pulse with rot, seep with poison, and smell of despair. Every step sinks into a sludge of mud, blood, and chemical runoff, sucking at boots as though the earth itself conspires to hold the living down. Rats scuttle over corpses, gnawing at exposed sinew, their tiny claws scraping across brittle bones. Flies swarm in nauseating clouds, their wings buzzing like the whispers of the dead. The air is thick, a permanent fog of sulfur, smoke, and metallic tang, curling into every lung, every pore, as thoroughly as the mind. For the Chem-Dogs, the trenches are home, prison, and battlefield all at once. They sleep atop decomposing bodies, trying to carve a semblance of comfort from cold mud. Their rations are slim. If they are lucky, half-cooked protein, paste laced with toxic minerals. Water is a rare gift, often so fouled with chemicals that drinking it feels like swallowing liquid fire. Yet they drink. They must. Survival is never optional here. Every day is a test of endurance. Artillery shakes the ground without warning, sending mud and flesh flying in grotesque showers. Mortar shells explode so close that the shockwaves knock soldiers off their feet, disorienting even the stim-fueled Chem-Dogs. Snipers pick off those who show the faintest hesitation, their eyes tracking movement like cold, calculating predators. Fear is constant, gnawing at nerves frayed by hunger, exhaustion, and chemical withdrawal. The trenches do not forgive mistakes. One misstep and a Chem-Dog falls into a pit of burning sludge or is impaled on jagged rebar protruding from collapsed walls. The mud is a grave for the careless, the unlucky, the slow. Blood mixes with soil in a dark, sticky paste, coating boots, hands, faces. A tactile reminder that death is ever present. Yet life continues. The Chem-Dogs cling to routines no matter how grim. They patch wounds with scraps of cloth, sharing antiseptic when it exists. They whisper to each other in fleeting moments of clarity, sharing memories of a world they barely remember, instructing small islands of humanity amid the horror. Some hum songs from childhood, the tunes barely recognizable through coughing fits of blackened mucus. Others speak to the dead as if expecting answers, their voices trembling, cracking under the weight of grief. The emotional toll is immense. Every night the living sleep atop the dead, their dreams haunted by twitching corpses, the groans of men broken beyond repair, the endless echo of gunfire. Hallucinations bleed into reality, shadows stretching impossibly long, whispers threading through fog, guiding or misleading the weary soldiers. The mind bends, warping perception, yet the body endures. The Chem-Dogs keep moving because stopping is unthinkable. Stagnation is death. Even camaraderie cannot fully shield them from despair. The trenches are a school of brutality. Betrayal, rage, and fear are constant companions. Yet these horrors forge the Chem-Dogs, binding them to each other with bonds more profound than those of blood. They fight not for medals, not for the emperor, not for glory, but for survival and for the fragile hope that their brotherhood will outlast the next bombardment, the next chemical storm, the next hellish dawn. Here in the mud, amidst the flies, the blood, and the smoke, the trenches teach their cruel lesson. Life is agony, death is merciful, and only the damned survive. Above the trenches, far from the stink of mud and death, the high command observes with cold calculation. From fortified platforms and hovering Vox towers, officers sit in sterile comfort, their uniforms spotless, their boots gleaming. They sip recycled rations and smoke expensive cigars while below, the Chem-Dogs crawl through fire, mud, and the mangled bodies of their brothers. To the Imperium, the Chem-Dogs are not soldiers. They are commodities, tools, disposable assets. The commanders watch as numbers flash across their displays, casualty rates, mission efficiency, body counts, and nod with satisfaction when the death toll meets their expectations. They'll take the hill, one officer says without concern, or they'll be reduced to corpses. Either outcome serves the Empire. The system is meticulous. Suicide missions are assigned with bureaucratic precision. No thought is given to the men, only the outcomes. Chem-Dogs are sent to breach fortified bunkers, storm no man, under blistering artillery, and hold positions with the faint hope of survival. Each order is deliberate, each target a calculated risk. Life is not valued, obedience is demanded, and death is expected. Betting pools flourish in the background. Officers wager on how many Chem-Dogs will return from the next deployment, laughing at the predictions of survival like some cruel sport. The losers of these wagers pay nothing. The fallen do not collect debts, do not scream, do not protest. Corpses are not mourned. They are tallied, archived, and filed as statistics in a ledger of human expendability. Discipline is a tool of fear. Commissars patrol the trenches, executing those who hesitate or falter. A Chem-Dog who shows fear, disobedience, or even hesitation is a liability. Their deaths are justified with cold efficiency. A failure is contagious. Execution preserves morale. Yet these words are hollow. Morale is already fractured. The Chem-Dogs survive not because of loyalty or courage, but because the alternative is death at the hands of their superiors, or the battlefield itself. Orders come down as immutable laws. Retreat is forbidden. Survival is optional. Guards and officers watch as the soldiers are funneled into death traps, knowing full well how many will not return. The Chem-Dogs are tools, stripped of humanity, sharpened into weapons of obedience and suffering. Each mission serves the dual purpose of forward conquest and human experimentation. How much can the body endure? How far can the mind fracture before it shatters completely? Yet even in this machine of cruelty, sparks of rebellion flicker. The Chem-Dogs recognize the truth. They are used, discarded, and remembered only as fuel for the Imperium's endless war. Each glance exchanged between soldiers carries unspoken understanding. Survival is more than obedience. It is resistance. It is a statement that even in death they refuse to be erased entirely. The battlefield below rumbles with artillery, screams, and smoke, while above commands are issued with detached authority. To send them again. More casualties will teach them discipline. And so the Chem-Dogs march into slaughter, molded by fear, forged by pain, and marked forever as the Imperium's expendable assets. The orders came down through static-laden Vox channels, crisp and devoid of warmth. A suicide mission, not a raid, not a reconnaissance. A full descent into a bunker the locals whispered about in terrified voices, a place drenched in superstition, dubbed cursed long before the Imperium ever claimed it. Light barely penetrated its entrances. Corridors wound like veins through the earth, each step echoing into nothing. The Chem-Dogs gathered at the threshold, shoulders slumped, boots sinking into the sludge outside the entrance. Their breaths came out in ragged puffs, chemical-laden mists mingling with the cold, metallic tang of gun oil. Each man, or what remained of their shattered shells, felt the weight of inevitability. They had survived the meat grinder, and now they were to be fed into something older, darker, unseen. As they entered, darkness embraced them like a suffocating shroud. The walls were slick with condensation and unidentifiable grime. A low hum vibrated through the floor, subtle at first, then growing, threading through their bones. Each flicker of light from failing headlamps cast long, sinister shadows, turning corners into monsters and empty spaces into traps. The first steps were silent, but soon the bunker made its presence known. Metal groaned. Pipes shivered. Something moved in the periphery, a crawling sound, wet and deliberate, that seemed to echo from every direction and nowhere at once. One Chem-Dog froze, gripping his last gun tighter. A whisper ran through the squad. Keep moving. Don't stop. Deeper in, the darkness became a living thing. The walls exhaled a fetid breath. Shadows twisted into forms that mimicked the living and the dead alike. Footsteps that weren't theirs echoed back. Doors that had been closed creaked open. They were conditioned for obedience, molded for sacrifice, trained to endure pain beyond comprehension. And yet, fear, anger, grief, and the remnants of humanity clung stubbornly to their hearts. One voice, quiet but steady, broke through. Maybe we don't have to obey. Maybe this time we decide. The idea, simple and terrifying, spread through the squad like wildfire. Eyes widened, hearts hammered, and for the first time in years, hesitation replaced instinct. They were soldiers bred for death, but could they reclaim the will to live on their own terms? Arguments erupted, each man grappling with the horror of disobedience, the certainty of execution, and the weight of self-preservation. Flashbacks haunted them. Friends left behind in mud, screams swallowed by fire, comrades consumed by chemical fog and stim-induced madness. Every memory was a tether pulling them toward obedience. Every instinct screamed survival. And then came a pause, a shared collective understanding. They were no longer just Chem-Dogs. They were broken, yes, but not defeated. They carried the scars, the memories, the ghosts of all who had fallen. And with that understanding came clarity. Obeying blind orders would strip the last remnants of humanity from them. Defiance, though terrifying, was the only path left to retain themselves. But choosing defiance came with a price. Death, sure, but also the unrelenting weight of knowing that survival was no longer enough. They could no longer just follow. They had to decide, and in deciding, they would find out who they truly were. The moral breaking point had been reached. Not a moment of victory, nor of hope, but a precipice where fear met clarity, where despair met defiance. And somewhere deep in the mud and blood, in the hearts of the damned, a spark of choice flickered. They were Chem-Dogs, They were survivors, and for the first time, perhaps they were no longer disposable. I don't want to die for them, but I'll die for you. The morning fog clung to the battlefield like a shroud, heavy with the stench of rot and chemical. Smoke spiraled from smoldering craters, the last vestiges of artillery fire, painting the sky in sickly orange streaks. The Chem-Dogs moved silently, their boots squelching through mud that had absorbed blood, sweat, and desperation for weeks, maybe months. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every breath a struggle against the acrid fog that clawed at their lungs. They had survived impossible odds. They had seen friends torn apart, mangled beyond recognition, yet still they pressed forward. But even among the strongest, weariness had its claim. Faces were gaunt, eyes hollow. The kind of hollow that comes from staring death in the face too often. And then the order came, the mission that no one survived. They were to infiltrate an enemy bunker buried beneath the charred remains of the industrial wasteland, a place rumored to be cursed by the old heretics. The old heretic. Rumors in Savlar weren't just rumors, they were promises. The squad moved as one, but one of them faltered. Merrick, a young recruit barely 19, stumbled over a mound of corpses, his chest heaved, body trembling violently. His eyes met the squad leader's, Descharnes, and for the first time the fear in his gaze wasn't masked by stim-induced numbness. I can't, Merrick whispered, voice breaking. I'll die in there. I know I will. Descharnes' face was a mask of grim understanding. Then stay. But none of you will forget me, Merrick muttered, shoving the others forward. They entered the bunker. Darkness swallowed them. Only the faint glow of contaminated lamps flickered along rusted walls. Every step echoed like a heartbeat in a tomb. The air reeked of decay and chemicals, a suffocating perfume of death that had been brewing for decades. Shadows moved unnaturally. Sounds that shouldn't exist whispered from the walls. Something crawling, watching, waiting. The squad's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, and then it happened. A collapse. Part of the ceiling caved in, separating Merrick from the others. Dust choked the air, blinding them, and the enemy, whatever it was, attacked with relentless precision. Merrick screamed, but it was useless. The squad could not reach him. He was trapped. And then, with a clarity that seemed to pierce the fog of fear, Descharnes made the decision no one else could. I don't want to die for them, he muttered, almost to himself. I'll die for you. He surged forward. Every step was agony. Metal and concrete threatened to crush him. The enemy's presence was overwhelming, spectral shapes that clawed at his sanity. Yet he reached Merrick, placing himself between the boy and the oncoming horror. Blasts tore through the bunker, chunks of rubble shredding Descharnes' armor. Drawing blood in torrents, he fought like a man possessed, every motion fueled by instinct, loyalty, and desperation. He shoved Merrick toward the exit, every inch forward a battle against death itself. One by one, his squad covered them, but the enemy's forces were too many. In a final act, Descharnes threw himself onto a detonator wired beneath a collapsing support beam. The explosion ripped through the bunker, fire and debris swallowing him whole. He was gone in a heartbeat, but Merrick, trembling and alive, was pushed clear. Silence fell in the aftermath. Smoke, dust, and the faint scent of charred metal lingered. The squad gathered around Merrick, tear-streaking faces caked with mud and blood. The enormity of what Descharnes had done sank deep, weighing on their hearts like lead. One by one, they placed hands over their chests, feeling the absence of their fallen brother. For Descharnes, the mission, the squad, and even life itself had been sacrificed. Not for glory, not for the Imperium, but for them. In that moment, in the stillness after the fire, something vital endured. A spark of humanity, a reminder that even in the horrors of Savlar, bonds were real. The squad whispered prayers, small and broken, for the man who gave everything so they might live. Descharnes' sacrifice became a shadow that would forever follow them, a symbol of the line between survival and honor. And in the hearts of the living, a promise was forged. They would endure, not for medals, not for glory, but for each other. The war never truly ended, not for the survivors. Even after the bombardments faded, even after the mud and fire settled into a grim, scorched memory, the battlefield followed them home. Their minds were graveyards littered with fragments of screams, broken bodies, and the echo of artillery fire that never stopped. Sleep was a stranger. Nightmares came in relentless waves, each one more vivid than the last. Merrick jolted awake, gasping for air, covered in cold sweat, heart hammering as if still running through no man's land. The faces of the dead lingered behind his eyelids. Descharnes' bloodied armor, corpses twisted into impossible angles, and the clawed shadows of something that had followed them from the cursed bunker. Hallucinations weren't uncommon. Shadows moved at the edge of vision, whispers crawled along walls, and even the wind seemed to carry the voices of the dead. One moment, a soldier might be reaching for a ration pack. The next, it was a severed hand, fingers curling toward him in accusation. Pain was constant, but muted. Chemstims had done their work, nerves shredded, senses dulled, but the mind remained sharp enough to remember every horror. Fingers twitched involuntarily. A leg would jerk at night, as if running from phantoms. The body was a cage, and the mind a tormentor. They screamed in silence. Alone in the trench or in the relative safety of a ruined encampment, they would mutter fragments of commands, fragments of prayers, or names long lost. No one comforted them, not truly. The wardens of the Imperium had moved on, the high command indifferent, and the living were too haunted themselves to help. Paranoia became a second heartbeat. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, every flicker of movement in the corner of an eye was a potential ambush. Merrick flinched at shadows that weren't there, twitching at phantom touches, seeing enemy figures that vanished when stared at directly. Some tried to find solace in routine, scrubbing weapons, maintaining armor, cleaning their rations, but even these acts felt hollow. The dead were never far. Corpses of comrades, friends, and strangers alike haunted the edges of their consciousness. Every time they closed their eyes, the ground beneath them shifted with the weight of the fallen. Voices weren't merely echoes of the past. They became dialogues, debates, accusations. One Chem-Dog would whisper, "Why did we survive?" Another answered in the same voice, "Because someone had to live with this." And the answer brought no comfort, only the relentless weight of survivors' guilt. Their nightmares bled into their waking hours. A sudden flash of movement in the trench made them lunge, rifle aimed at imagined foes. The stench of charred flesh would make their stomachs churn, even in a clean mess hall. Every sound, the whistle of artillery, the crack of a rifle, the groan of metal, returned them to the trenches. Over and over again, PTSD didn't strike with the subtlety of a normal wound. It was insidious. It wrapped itself around memory, emotion, and identity. They were Chem-Dogs, monsters to some, survivors to none. And the war, endless and unyielding, ensured that the mind cracked long before the body finally gave in. Yet in that brokenness, something remained, a spark fragile and trembling, a shared understanding that even shattered, even haunted, they were still alive, still Chem-Dogs. Still part of a brotherhood that refused to forget, refused to forgive, refused to truly die. Every twitch, every whisper, every nightmare was a reminder. They had survived Savlar. They had survived the meat grind. And though the mind might fracture and the soul might scream, survival itself had become a dark, unyielding ritual. The morning air was thick with a chemical fog that clung to the trenches like a suffocating blanket. Every inhale burned the lungs. Every step threatened to drag the Chem-Dogs into the mud that had become their world. The horizon glowed red and orange, fire from distant bombardments painting silhouettes of shattered tanks and twisted metal. Orders crackled over the Vox. Woo! But the words were meaningless to those who had already seen too much death. Survival was instinct now, unmediated by loyalty or fear. They moved forward as one, a crawling, stumbling wave of ragged soldiers, faces smeared with mud and soot, armor scorched and fractured. Cannon fire erupted around them, shaking the ground, sending spray of mud and flesh into the air. Every impact was a hammer to the chest, each concussion threatening to shatter bones, already weakened by chem-stims and starvation. Yet they pressed onward, driven by some grim, silent pact. Either they walked out together or they died together. Through the chaos, Merrick caught glimpses of his brothers in arms. Faces streaked with blood and grime, eyes wide with the knowledge that this could be the last moment of life they'd ever see. Yet there was a fire in those eyes, a savage, unyielding defiance that refused to bow to the Imperium's cruelty. They charged through no man's land, over piles of corpses that had not yet cooled, past trenches where survivors screamed into the void, seeking aid that would never come. The air was alive with the metallic tang of blood, the acrid stench of burned flesh, the low hum of incoming artillery. Bullets ripped through the fog, tearing chunks from mud, metal, and men alike. Some fell screaming, limbs severed by shrapnel. Others stumbled on, broken and bleeding, barely conscious. Pain had become irrelevant. Chem-stims dulled the agony, leaving only the sharp edge of adrenaline and the instinct to survive. The enemy was everywhere. Snipers perched in the ruins, flamethrowers ignited the horizon, mechanized units roared across the battlefield. Yet the Chem-Dogs pressed forward, driven by rage, fear, and an almost feral camaraderie. Merrick's rifle jammed. He kicked it aside and drew a combat knife, the steel slick with blood. Beside him, another Chem-Dog tore through a barricade of corpses, fists and teeth flailing as artillery shells exploded at their feet. They were demons in the fog, half man, half machine, entirely unstoppable. And then came the scream. A wave of enemy soldiers screaming in terror or defiance collided with them. The trench became a vortex of violence. Bodies slammed into one another, mud and blood mixing into a grotesque canvas. Bones snapped, blood sprayed, yet still the Chem-Dogs advanced. Or maybe minutes, time had fractured into chaos. Passed in a blur of fire, smoke, and raw survival. Every Chem-Dog fought like a cornered animal. Senses sharpened, instincts heightened, their minds a maelstrom of fear and fury. Merrick glanced around and saw the cost. Friends gone, comrades mangled beyond recognition, their sacrifices smeared into the mud of a war that had no mercy. Yet still they fought, and still they lived. The final line had come, the edge of the slaughterhouse where death was a promise, not a threat. Then came a silence, brief, eerie, unnatural. Smoke curled and lifted, revealing the battlefield in its true horror. Bodies strewn like discarded dolls, fires burning in unnatural patterns, the air thick with the acrid tang of destruction. Merrick's squad looked at one another, shaking, bleeding, alive. Against all odds, they had survived, and yet the cost was clear. The battlefield had claimed everything, leaving only the barest sliver of humanity intact. The Chem-Dogs had walked out, or had survived at least, and in that survival they found a terrible, bitter victory. They had become legends in their own right. Survivors of Savlar, masters of the meat grinder, haunted yet unbroken. The spark within Merrick, pulsing like a heartbeat against his chest, whispered of endurance, of fury, of a world that would tremble at their continued existence. The final battle had ended. The Chem-Dogs had lived, but they were irrevocably changed. The battlefield had quieted, though not in mercy. Smoke rose in sluggish columns, twisting skyward like blackened fingers. Fires smoldered across shattered trenches, casting flickering shadows on the mud, the bodies, the broken shells of war machines. The air tasted metallic, bitter, and heavy with the unwashed scent of death. Merrick moved slowly, almost mechanically, over the torn earth. His boots squelched through pools of blood and melted armor. Every step was measured, every breath a struggle, as if inhaling life itself had become an act of courage. Around him, the corpses of friend and foe alike were indistinguishable, faces smashed, limbs bent at impossible angles, eyes staring blankly at a sky that had betrayed them. "Oh, bro, Merrick." A faint, broken voice trembled through the fog. He froze, scanning the wreckage. In the mud, half buried under a collapsed trench wall, was Cale. His uniform shredded, one arm mangled beyond recognition, the other clutching a torn dog tag. Blood coated his face, mixing with soot and grime. Merrick knelt, heart hammered. He tore at debris, pulled Cale free, and checked for signs of life. A shallow breath. That was all, but it was enough. The boy was alive. Around them, the remnants of their squad moved like ghosts. Some crawled, some dragged themselves, all searching. Each discovery was a pang, a mix of relief and horror. Merrick found Taryn pressed against a shattered wall, unconscious but breathing. He found Jorik, pinned beneath the remnants of a mechanized barricade, eyes wide with shock but clinging stubbornly to life. And then there were those who would not move again. Faces familiar, now frozen in eternal scream or silence. Dog tags clinked against the mud as Merrick collected them, each one a memory, a story, a life snuffed out by the indifferent machinery of war. Every sound was amplified. The drip of blood into mud, the groan of settling metal, the distant hiss of fire. Merrick's mind swirled with the faces of those he had known. He whispered their names, prayers, or curses. He didn't know which. "The Emperor doesn't protect us. Not anymore," he muttered, voice hoarse. His hands trembled as he held Cale upright. The boy's eyes flickered open, confusion and pain written across them. "We survived," somehow Merrick said, though the words felt hollow. Survival had come at too high a price. Rin appeared, staggering, eyes wide as he scanned the battlefield. He bent over a pile of bodies, pulling a familiar insignia from the mud. "Aluma, she's gone." His voice cracked, swallowed by the wind. Allura moved silently beside Merrick, face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes, always sharp and calculating, now flickered with exhaustion and grief. She helped lift the wounded, scanned the perimeter, but there was no comfort to be found, only the realization. The battlefield had taken everything it could, leaving only the raw, jagged edge of human endurance. The spark inside Merrick pulsed faintly, a whisper against his ribs, steadying him, urging him forward. It reminded him of their survival, their defiance, the unbroken chain of those who had endured this hell. As they gathered, the living collected the dog tags and accounted for the missing. The sun struggled through the smoke, a dim, sickly light that barely touched the ground. Yet it was enough to mark the start of a new, haunted day. This was life after the fire, the aftermath of the slaughter. The Chem-Dogs had survived, but the scars were not just in flesh and bone. They were in the mind, the soul, and the memory of every fallen brother. Each survivor carried the weight of the dead, the burden of knowing that life here was cheap, fleeting, and always borrowed. And in that silence, broken only by the occasional cough, moan, or drip of blood, they understood a cruel truth. The war would continue, and they would continue with it, because for the Chem-Dogs to live was not mercy, it was defiance. Merrick sat on the edge of a crumbling trench, mud caking his uniform, the taste of blood and ash still thick on his tongue. Around him, the battlefield was slowly quieting, but the silence was not peaceful, it was accusatory. Every shadow seemed to leer, every rustle in the wind a reminder of lives lost, of horrors endured, of the cost of survival. He flexed his hand, stiff and cracked, stained with soot and scar. The spark in his chest pulsed faintly, a heartbeat that had grown stronger with each atrocity they had witnessed. It was both a curse and a mark of pride. He had survived when so many others had not, and that survival carried a weight heavier than any armor. "We are trash," he muttered, voice low, bitter. "We're criminals, convicts, the Imperium's mistakes. They throw us into hell and call it duty. They bet on our deaths and cheer when we fail to die." Rin plopped down beside him, scraping mud from his boots. "Yeah, but somehow we're still here." That's got to count for something, right? His attempt at levity fell flat. The edges of his face were drawn tight, exhaustion and horror written in every line. Illyra emerged from the smoke, sword slung carelessly across her back. She sat opposite Merrick, her eyes scanning the distant ruins. "Account for something?" she repeated softly. "His survival here is meaningless if we don't remember why we fight or for whom. But that's the thing. The Chem-Dogs never fight for medals, never for glory. We fight because if we don't, no one will." Luma, crouched near the edge of the trench, nodded grimly. Her ears twitched, catching every distant sound. "We are cursed," she said. "Accursed to walk this wasteland, cursed to see the dead rise, cursed to feel every scream echoing in our skulls. But, and this is the truth, Merrick, we are stronger than anyone else out there. The Imperium hates us, but they need us." Merrick closed his eyes, feeling the spark's warmth radiate through his chest. It pulsed in rhythm with his heart, a steady reminder that he was more than a survivor. He was a bearer of something ancient, something that had endured through centuries of blood and fire. The spark was not just power, it was identity. "They call us trash," he whispered. "They call us damned, but they don't know. They don't understand what it means to carry all this and still stand. To look death in the face, to step through fire and come out breathing. We are Chem-Dogs, we are cursed, we are unbroken." Around him, the wind carried the distant echoes of artillery, the moans of the dying, and the faint metallic groan of collapsed structures. Yet beneath it all, beneath the chaos and despair, Merrick felt a strange sense of pride. Not pride in what they had done, the kills, the destruction, the survival, but in who they were. He opened his eyes and looked at his brothers and sisters in mud and grime, scarred and hollowed by war. "For trash," he said again, louder this time. "But we are the kind of trash that refuses to break. We are the kind of trash that still fights when everything is lost. That is our curse, that is our pride." Rin scoffed, shaking his head, a small smile breaking through the fatigue. So we're trash heroes now. Cool, totally normal." Illyra placed a hand on Merrick's shoulder. "Normal doesn't survive Savlar," she said quietly. "But we do, and that makes us exceptional." The spark pulsed stronger, a warm, defiant heartbeat against the cold decay around them. Merrick breathed deeply, feeling the rhythm echo through his veins. For the first time since the deployment, he allowed himself a moment of clarity. The battlefield had taken much, but it had not taken their spirit. No, they were Chem-Dogs. Cursed, yes. Hated, yes. But alive, still fighting, and somehow unbroken. The sun tried to pierce the smoke above, a pale shaft of light hitting the mud and the bodies, glinting off the remnants of armor. In that light, Merrick saw himself reflected, not just as a soldier, not just as a survivor, but as something more. Something that the Imperium could neither understand nor destroy. They were Chem-Dogs. They were cursed. They were proud. And they were ready to face whatever horrors awaited them next. The battlefield lay in a hushed, terrible calm. Smoke drifted lazily across the shattered plains, carrying with it the scent of burned flesh, scorched earth, and chemical rot. Merrick stood at the edge of a crater, his boots sinking into the mud, hands trembling from exhaustion, adrenaline, and the persistent hum of the spark in his chest. Around him, the remnants of his squad moved like ghosts, broken, battered, scarred beyond recognition, faces once familiar now marked by soot and blood, eyes hollowed by the horrors of Savlar. Yet they were alive, breathing, standing, surviving. That alone was an achievement more profound than medals or commendations could ever measure. He looked down at his hands. They were cracked, caked with mud and dried blood. Fingers still ached from pulling comrades from trenches, from digging through rubble, from holding weapons that had felt like extensions of his own body. The spark pulsed gently beneath his skin, a reminder that he was more than just flesh and bone. He was a conduit, a bearer of something ancient, something the galaxy had long feared and forgotten. Merrick exhaled slowly, letting the chill wind wash over him. Around him, the scattered bodies of the dead were both a warning and a testament. Each tag, each shattered weapon, each broken armor plate whispered the same truth. A Chem-Dog's life was a curse, but within that curse there was meaning. He knelt beside a fallen comrade, touching a blood-stained dog tag. A whisper escaped his lips. I don't fight for them. I don't fight for glory. I fight for you. Now, the others, Rin, Luma, Illyri, stood in ragged formation around him, the weight of exhaustion and sorrow pressing down, yet an unspoken unity held them together. They had been through fire, through slaughter, through the very embodiment of despair. And still they remained. The spark inside Merrick flared softly, resonating with the world around him. The land seemed to exhale, the wind carrying the faint hum of something awakening in the ruins, a quiet acknowledgement that this battlefield, so cruel and relentless, had been survived. That despite the pain, despite the loss, despite the endless horrors of war, life, however battered and broken, endured. Merrick rose slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. The smoke parted enough to reveal the distant sun, casting pale gold light across the desolation. He could feel the weight of every fallen brother, every wasted life, every scream and every tear. But he also felt something else, the pride of survival, the stubborn defiance of the damned, the unyielding heartbeat of the Chem-Dogs. He turned to his squad, voice low but unwavering. We are Savlar Chem-Dogs. We are cursed, we are hated, but we are alive, and our lives are ours. Every scar, every wound, every choice to stand when the world wanted us broken. It matters. It means something. Never forget that. Rin let out a shaky laugh, wiping grime from his face. Yeah, horrible, miserable, trash-tier soldiers, but alive. And somehow still the most terrifying force anyone will ever underestimate. Illyra's eyes softened. We've survived the unthinkable. We've carried the spark, we've fought the impossible. And though our lives are cursed, our purpose is real. We matter. Every step we take forward matters. Luma, quiet as ever, finally spoke. This is what it means to be a Chem-Dog, to carry the weight of death and still move, to bear the scars and still fight, to live, even when life itself seems meaningless. Merrick closed his eyes, feeling the spark pulse in time with his heartbeat. He raised a hand toward the sky, letting the warmth of the light, the hum of the spark, and the silence of the battlefield wash over him. For the first time, he felt the entirety of his cursed existence coalesce into something simple and profound. Survival was not meaningless. The horrors of war, the pain, the endless suffering, they were threads in a tapestry that he and his brothers and sisters were still weaving. He opened his eyes. The spark burned brighter now, steady, defiant, alive. Merrick exhaled, a shiver running down his spine. He was no longer just a soldier. No longer just a survivor, he was a Chem-Dog, a bearer of the spark, a witness to horrors the galaxy would forget, and a defiant force in a universe that demanded he break. And he would not. The camera of imagination pulls back, revealing the battlefield in its full, tragic glory. Nori. Smoke curls, fires smolder, and bodies lie broken. But amidst it all, life persists. The Chem-Dogs stand tall, battered but unbowed. A solitary figure in the distance raises a fist, signaling defiance. A spark of golden light glows beneath mud-caked armor. A reminder that even in the most terrible life, there is meaning, and even in the darkest place, courage burns. The narrator's voice rises, soft yet commanding, over the dying echoes of artillery. We don't fight for medals.